Car crash cases, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts. The attorneys, with Josh Wright from the law firm of Hollis Wright and host David Lamb.
Good evening and welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for making us being with us here on this Sunday night. Always appreciate the time. We've got a panel of experts ready to deal with a kind of a couple of hot button topics you're going to be interested in. When you think of a question, get that into us. You'll see the information how to do that at the bottom of the screen. Also, Hollis Wright makes available each and every Sunday evening attorneys standing by live just to speak with you. So a neat opportunity there to get some great free legal advice. Leading our conversation, a partner at the firm of Hollis Wright, Carter Clay. Good to see you.
Good to see you, David. Yeah, we're going to be tackling driving under the influence of drugs and alcohol this evening. Obviously, for many, many years, it's a problem that has plagued our society, and kind of getting ready for the show here this evening, I was looking at some statistics, and one thing that jumped out at me is that about 40% annually of the motor vehicle accidents that result in a fatality involve alcohol. So think about that for a second. Every 10 individuals that die in a motor vehicle accident, about 4 individuals are dying in an accident that involves alcohol. So I thought that was a pretty high percentage. And we're very fortunate tonight to have an individual named Chris Reid here with us from the Reid Law Firm. Chris has a very diverse legal practice, been practicing for several years. He's been on the show before. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming back on the show. And tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and about your legal practice.
Well, I have a general practice, so we do many things: DUI, drug defense, contract disputes, litigation. I'm an NFL agent, so I deal with athletes, and I co-host a show for Yellowhammer Radio, so I do political commentary. I'm also doing political commentary tomorrow on another network, so I do a whole lot of things, and I love doing it.
Well, great. Well, how did you get involved in this particular area of the law relative to DUIs or driving under the influence of drugs and alcohol?
Well, I grew up, and my dad is a physician and my mom is a counselor. And so when I was very young, I kind of saw what happened to people whenever they had substance abuse issues. And so when I went to law school and passed the bar, I really was interested in this area because I wanted to assist people that were going through those things, not just from the legal side, but also try to help them, get counseling, let them know that somebody out there cares, and just let them know that it's not the end of the world, and you can make better choices. And so I love doing it, and I've seen a lot of my clients just completely change their lives after we've dealt with the legal issues.
So you've really kind of embraced not only representing or defending individuals that have been charged with a DUI, but you've really embraced sort of the counseling aspect of that in the event that perhaps you come across somebody that through talking with them you realize that this is not just an isolated incident where somebody happened to have a little too much to drink and got pulled over, that the problem is much deeper. You've really kind of embraced the counseling side of that and helping them get some treatment perhaps to overcome that problem.
Yes, and it actually makes a big difference as far as legal strategy, because once you talk to a person about the underlying issues, you get those addressed, they're actually much more likely to collaborate with you. They appreciate it because they trust you. And so you've given that person a reason to believe that, hey, it's going to be okay, we're going to get through this. And whenever you take them to court and the district attorney and judges see that, they're usually very merciful. And it's almost like this is a turning point in the life of somebody. Whereas if I just approach it like, hey, I'm just going to get you off, you can do whatever you want, that doesn't help them. They're not taking responsibility. And generally, if you come in there arrogant, you're not really going to get great deals from the DA, and the judges do not like it. So it's not helping your client out.
And so it's certainly a way that by the time you actually get to a plea bargain, or by the time you were to get to the trial of the DUI case, you're sort of armed with additional information that would help mitigate some of the penalties perhaps that a judge might otherwise impose on the individual. For instance, you can say, Judge, we're here to plead guilty, and I know this is the third DUI in a 2-year time period, but hey, let me tell you what he's been doing over the last 9 months to help himself. And here's the treatment that he's gotten, and here's how diligent he's been and consistent he's been with going through that treatment regimen. And I guess those are what you're talking about, are the types of things that judges are receptive to in terms of perhaps lowering the punishment or penalty.
Yes, and I mean, I can tell the judges and the district attorneys that we track our clients that we've done DUIs or drug cases for, and over 90% of them never reoffend. And so we track them years out. I keep track of all of them, and so the amount of people that I work with, we rarely ever see them do it again. And so I can say, look, whenever I'm talking to a prosecutor I know, I can tell them, I've done many of these cases, this guy is serious, I met with his family, I know the counselor, and that carries a whole lot more weight than just, hey, can we get this guy a deal? Because then they're just seeing a sheet of paper with the offense on there. If you get them to see this is a human being, and he's going through something, and he's really trying to get his life right, and here's why, then they're really open to working with you, because at that point, they want them to succeed. And I think that's a different strategy that I try to employ, and it's been very successful in the past 7 years.
Where do you see the practice of doing criminal DUI defense work in, say, 10 to 20 years? And this is something that I've been very curious about because of Uber and Lyft and discussions about driverless cars coming on the market and things like that. I mean, obviously, in order for somebody to get a DUI charge or ticket, they've got to be either driving a vehicle or they've got to have the key in the ignition. It's got to be turned on and in control of the vehicle. Where do you see your practice or the practice of that kind of work in the next 10 to 20 years because of all that going on from a technological standpoint?
Well, my greatest hope is that you no longer need DUI attorneys because there's no more DUIs, but I'd like to say that that would decrease it. But actually what we're seeing now is that most people that get pulled over for a DUI in Alabama, it's not just alcohol, it's multiple substances. The #1 substance along with alcohol is Xanax. And so I think it's less than 30% of DUIs we see now, it's just alcohol. So I think where DUI practice is going is you have a lot of college kids, maybe they're experimenting with all these different drugs, and it's created just huge issues, because not only are the cops have to pull them over, arrest them for DUI, but sometimes they got to administer certain medicines so they don't die. And there's all these other issues with it. So hopefully DUI practice, there's better training to recognize that someone has a substance addiction and kind of treat it there so you don't keep reoffending and reoffending.
Yeah, and we've got the real problem with the opioid epidemic right now. I think recent news talked about Tiger Woods. I think most people know about his DUI incident down there in Florida, and I think recent news shows that he had like 4 different types of prescription medications in his system. So that's a situation that is really plaguing our society as a whole and is pervasive.
Oh, it's terrible. We had 60,000 deaths, I believe, last year from opioid overdose. Most of those were prescription drugs given by doctors. So that's like 9/11 times 6 or 7 times each year.
Goodness.
And so that's crazy. So we need to do something to address that issue.
Yeah, time for us to take our first break of the evening. So let's step aside as we do so. A reminder of how you can join the conversation. Stay with us. We've got more of the attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm. Thank you for watching The Attorneys. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple: provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury-related topics, you can call, email, or text us. Or you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or simply contact us by going to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us link. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us watching The Attorneys.
Talking about DUIs and drug cases tonight on the Attorneys. Appreciate you joining us. Reminders before we get back to the conversations, ways you can join our conversation at the bottom of your screen. And remember, those attorneys from Hollis Wright standing by live right now to speak with you. Carter?
Yeah, and I'll have to admit, I always feel a little bit awkward kind of covering what we're about to cover, because I feel like somebody's going to call in and say, you guys are just trying to give advice to people on how to get out of getting a DUI.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we are attorneys,
right,
and people do want some advice, and they want to know kind of what their rights are, what they have to do, what they don't have to do when they're pulled over. So let's talk a little bit about that, Chris, if we can. If somebody is out there driving their automobile, maybe they've had a drink or several drinks, and they do get pulled over by a police officer, what are their obligations from a cooperation standpoint with the police officer? What information do they have to give, and what do they have to do to be in compliance with the law, but at the same time perhaps not jeopardize their rights?
The most important thing I would say to anyone watching this is, one, don't drink and drive, but if you're in that situation, the most important thing is be respectful to the police officer. I've had cases where people were very respectful to the officer, even though they did some things that were wrong, they got a lot of mercy. But I had other clients who say, they were kind of jerks and stuff, and they didn't get very good deals because the way you treat the police officer matters. But as far as your legal rights, you have a Fourth Amendment right as far as your vehicle. It's not the same as your house. So let's just say someone gets pulled over and the police see that there's a bag of marijuana next to you. Well, they don't need a search warrant for that because that's in plain sight. So they have every right to arrest you, take that into evidence. But in a different example, let's say that you get pulled over and you have something illegal in the trunk or the glove compartment. In that situation, it's not plain sight. The police officers generally would need to get a search warrant because you still have a Fourth Amendment right. Now, as far as the taking a breathalyzer, not taking a breathalyzer, I usually get that question. I would generally recommend, if you've been drinking, to refuse the breathalyzer, and here's why. Alabama is a double minimum state, meaning if you blow over a .15, that's felony DUI, and it's not misdemeanor DUI. So if you've been drinking and they ask you to blow, then it's better to just say, no, thank you, officer, because then you're going to get charged with DUI, but you're probably not going to get charged with a felony DUI. And as far as the administrative suspension that will happen, what we can do is, I do this for every case, is when they get their license suspended, you have 45 days to appeal that. We appeal that to circuit court, and that stays the suspension usually for about 5 months. And then you work with the administrative agencies at that time and try to negotiate a deal so they're not suspended for 180 days, maybe it's 40 days or 20 days, but you can put that, you have an absolute right to stay that so you can continue your job and make arrangements so you're not going to lose employment or things like that.
Now, is it an automatic suspension of your driver's license for 6 months if you refuse to take the breathalyzer test?
Generally, yes. If you refuse, it's 180 days. But again, one thing we do, which is a little legal technical, if you write a letter within 10 days to the administrative agency and the police officer hasn't gotten the paperwork in, or they didn't do what they needed to do, you can actually they don't get suspended at all. I had 3 cases in a row where all I did was write one letter, but the paperwork wasn't done, it wasn't in the system, and all those clients didn't have their license suspended for even a day. Now, they're getting much better at that, but for the most part, you're going to want to do that after 45 days. And again, whenever we talked about like counseling, getting people help, that actually helps with that too. If I can talk to the people involved in that and say, this person's getting help, they're doing counseling, they're doing great, this is what the district attorney said about them, that'll make a real difference. And even on maybe they won't suspend them for quite as long, but generally speaking, it's better not to take a breathalyzer because you're giving evidence of a felony if you drank too much. Now,
do the police officers have breathalyzers on them in their vehicle to do on the spot?
Generally they do, but I think they generally take you to the police station. I think that's the official one, and that's where they do it. So they can also do field sobriety tests. They can do a variety of things.
Now, with respect though, if they have a breathalyzer on them, I could envision a scenario where somebody gets pulled over and they've only had one beer. They clearly don't think that they're impaired, and they think to themselves, well, the police officers asked me to take a breathalyzer. I know Chris Reid said don't do it, but if I do it, I know I'm not impaired. I know I'm going to be below the legal limit. Maybe the police officer will just let me go and leave. What advice would you give there? Still not do it?
No, in that situation, absolutely. If you haven't drank, or if you had one drink, take the breathalyzer, because the legal limit is 0.08. And unless you weigh 50 pounds, you're not going to be over that for having one drink. Now, a lot of people will say they had one drink, but it's like 6 shots. So I was like, that was just one drink. I was that may have been in one container, but that's not the same thing. So yes, in that situation, one beer, take it, and you're perfectly in your rights, and you're not even close to impairment at that level.
Now, is there any threshold requirement that the police officer has to meet in order to administer a breathalyzer? In other words, does he have to have suspicion that you're impaired in some way, or can they just say, hey, I smell alcohol on your breath, or even I don't smell it, I just want you to take the breathalyzer?
Generally, police officers are very bright, so they're going to be able to kind of assess that quickly, but Alabama, we have implied consent, so the fact that you have a driver's license, the fact that you're driving means that you are consenting to a breathalyzer or a field sobriety test. So technically you have to consent, but the consequence is your license will be suspended for 180 days.
Yeah. Now, if we have time before the break, you had mentioned about searching the vehicle, and if an individual does not give consent to the police officer to search the vehicle, then under what circumstances can the police officer get a search warrant? Is that something they can get on the spot? They can make a call and get it, or what's the process in that regard?
There's a lot of different ways to get a search warrant. Sometimes you have to get it from a judge. Judge gets that. Sometimes you can get it from, if you have a drug sniffing dog and it barks, then that might be sufficient for probable cause for them to do it. But generally it's the same as getting a warrant to search someone's house. They usually they can detain you while they're getting the search warrant, but if they think you're not like a serious priority, maybe you're just, a college kid they think may have weed, they generally aren't going to waste an hour or 2 hours of their time if that's the case. Now, if they look you up and you're a drug trafficker, they are going to find a way to get a warrant. You're not going anywhere. Yeah. So some of that just depends on the situation the police are in.
Time for us to take our final break of the evening, so we're going to step aside. As we do so, ways here to get involved in this conversation with just a few minutes remaining. Also find the firm on social media as well. Stay tuned. More of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Carter Clay with the law firm of Hollis Wright. When you serve on a jury, you might expect to have all of the evidence presented to you during the course of a case. But there are some forms of evidence that are not allowed in court. In tonight's Legal 411, we are answering the question, why can't jurors see police incident reports? Most jurors would like to see crash reports during a trial, especially since these documents almost always show the investigating officer's opinion on who was at fault for the crash. Unfortunately, Alabama law prohibits the introduction of such reports into evidence. Alabama law states that no such accident report shall be used as evidence in any trial, civil or criminal, arising out of an accident. According to lawmakers who wrote and approved this rule, the reason accident reports cannot be admitted as evidence is that a jury might place too much weight on an official document such as a police report. There are some exceptions to this rule, of course, but most courts generally won't allow this type of evidence to be shown to a jury. Despite this rule, police officers who investigate crashes are still allowed to testify. They can tell a jury what they saw at the scene of the crash, including the road conditions and the positions of automobiles. An officer can also inform a jury of most any statement the people involved in the crash may have said to the officer during the investigation. The accident report can even be used to refresh an officer's memory of the crash. But the actual document itself cannot be introduced into evidence, and the officer's opinion of who is at fault is also excluded. That's because the jury is charged with deciding fault based on all the facts presented. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will always respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you.
A somber, firm fact there. Welcome back into the attorneys, talking about DUIs and drugs. We'd love to have you join our conversation, covering a lot of ground, but ways for you to get your questions into us. If you've got a question, get that, or you can pick up the phone and call attorneys from Hollis Wright who are standing by live. Carter?
And Chris, we talked earlier in the show about the opioid epidemic, and relative to driving under the influence, and given your years of experience in this area, what trends, if any, are you seeing relative to the percentages of individuals that are being charged and I guess convicted also of driving under the influence associated with prescription medications and other types of drugs? Has that increased dramatically over the years relative to your legal practice?
Yes. In the last 2 years especially, we've seen a lot of deaths from mixing fentanyl and heroin. And my dad's a physician, and he said it's like having a bullet and a gun and just spinning it around, because it's a very high chance you will die from mixing that combo. But we've seen a huge increase in that, and like we said earlier, most DUIs involve at least one other substance, but we're seeing a lot of heroin, more heroin than we've ever seen before. One reason is it's cheaper than it ever has been, and we're seeing an uptick in marijuana, and the THC content in marijuana now is significantly higher than it was 20, 30 years ago. So people smoking just a little will have major effect as far as their ability to drive now. So we're seeing a lot of that as well, but it's kind of the rare thing to see someone with just DUI alcohol.
How did we get to this point as a society? Is it a combination of just the heroin and the opioid type drugs on the black market coming in from outside our country or maybe here in the country, in combination with just abusing prescription medications that are prescribed by doctors? What's exactly transpired over the last several years to get to this point?
It's a perfect storm in a way. We have 4 times as many prescriptions for narcotics than we have in 1999, and we actually have less people that are suffering with pain then. So that's a huge issue. And yes, the prices have gotten cheaper, but there's also a cultural issue. Like a lot of times as people are young, they want to have a good time, but it's more than that. Often when they come to us, they've lost hope. You know, they're told that you can do whatever you want, have fun, there's no consequences. And we've kind of gotten away from sort of like structures of morality and faith as a society, and that just gets people to do whatever feels good. And what they don't understand is, yeah, they're gonna feel good for a moment if they do these drugs and it'll be fun, but if they keep doing it, their lives are ruined, families are ruined, and it can kill you. And so I say that to every client, and oftentimes they will actually listen, but I see a lot of people that just don't have hope, and that's something that we need to deal with as a society.
Yeah, and I don't know if you followed the legalization of marijuana in Colorado. Of course, that passed several years ago, and I think we're now starting to see some data and information about negative effects associated with legalizing marijuana in Colorado. Have you followed that at all, and do you have any insight on that relative to whether or not that's something we should consider on a federal level or across the board, state by state?
I wouldn't support it for Alabama. I think if they were to do what they've done is decriminalize, we don't want people going to jail for long sentences for smoking weed. We'd rather have jails for like murderers and rapists, and so that's just a resource question. As far as Colorado, there has been more increase as far as DUIs and some other things. They have had some increase in tax revenue, and they've got a lot of young professionals. But part of that is because Colorado's a beautiful state. You got mountains, all this other stuff. And right now, they're pretty much the only state where that recreational marijuana is legal. So if Alabama was to apply that, it's not like people would be traveling to Alabama to do marijuana. So I think the idea of just having marijuana available at every store, CVS, that might be a bridge too far. But again, 55% of the nation disagrees with me. 55% of the nation believes that it should be legalized. And if you look at the way that polling statistics work out, once you start getting 60, 65, usually in 5-10 years, something that was illegal is legal. So I would say we're going in that direction, but again, I think that should be a state-by-state issue. The federal government should not be involved in that.
And one of the things that you mentioned earlier in the show that made me think about this is that the THC levels are different today than perhaps they were 15, 20 years ago. And one thing that Colorado has experienced is a fairly significant increase in the number of emergency room visits for individuals that are either smoking the marijuana in Colorado, or now they got all these edibles and things that you can go and buy. And so they have had a pretty big uptick in the healthcare cost associated with overdose, associated with marijuana usage.
Yes, the big thing is the edibles out there, and they're trying to fix that, but what happens is kids will get a hold of it because they make candy, and so they're really going to have to change that, because THC in high doses is not good. You can get cannabis poisoning, it's very rare, but again, you're talking about 5-year-olds thinking something is a candy, and then it just messes up. They get nauseous, they throw up. Now, it's not the same thing as if they did heroin. Obviously, they're generally not going to die from it, but you have to be very careful with that stuff, and so if that ever was going to change in Alabama, edibles are just a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Just under 3 minutes remaining. Want to try to get this in. So say you get pulled over for a DUI, then what?
Well, one, be respectful to the officer. If you've been drinking, it's generally drinking a lot. It's better not to take the breathalyzer, and just whatever else the officer wants to do, you can comply with. You don't have to allow searching of the trunk or the glove compartment. But if you hadn't been drinking, comply, be respectful. But even if they handcuff you and take you in, be polite, be kind, say thank you and yes, sir, and just don't talk. I think the best thing I could say, one, if you're drinking, you're probably not in the best state to make statements.
Right.
But the best thing is to be quiet, and then talk to an attorney. But if someone's going to use us, I always say I won't take someone's case unless, one, they take personal responsibility, and two, they tell me like this, this was wrong, and I want to do this different. So
We're just about out of time.
I was going to say very briefly before we get to final thoughts, do you have to be driving in order to get a DUI?
There's been some interesting cases. Sometimes you could just be idling in your car with the keys in there, and they'll write you a DUI. Now, if you have an attorney, you might be able to get out of that, but generally it's kind of funny. There's been cases where people were in parked cars and they got DUIs, but in court you might be able to win, but they can still legally do it.
Okay, we got about 10 seconds from the both of you, but just a final thought from you, just 10, 15 seconds for our viewers.
Yeah, don't drink and drive. It's never worth it. And remember, if you do, take responsibility, own up, and realize it's not the end of your life.
And I'll just give a plug to Uber.
All right.
Use a taxi or take Uber if you've been drinking. Don't drive.
That's the way out of it. Chris, thanks for being with us.
It was great to be with you guys.
Yeah, appreciate it. Chris Reid, Carter Clay, appreciate you guys being with us, and you all as well. We always appreciate it whenever you're with us each and every Sunday night. We're wrapping things up, but as we do so, we leave you with ways you can get in touch with the firm of Hollis Wright. And remember, 24 hours a day, hollis-wright.com is open for business, so a great resource there. We appreciate the time, and we'll see you next time right here on The Attorneys.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.